The CEO in this scenario is not a cartoonishly cruel father in the sense of having no feelings. Rather, he is a man whose life has been dominated by the ruthless rules of corporate image, public perception, and the preservation of a carefully constructed empire. His daughter, paralyzed due to an accident, is already seen by him as someone who will struggle to fit into the glossy, image-obsessed social world he inhabits. That alone has strained their relationship, though he masks it under the guise of concern for her well-being. But when she becomes pregnant outside of marriage, the tension turns into a full break. For the father, the news is not just a personal matter, it is a perceived business disaster waiting to happen. The thought of shareholders, competitors, the press, and elite friends whispering about his scandal is intolerable to him. He imagines board meetings where his authority is quietly undermined, gala events where polite smiles hide sharp judgment, and investment deals slipping away because his family life no longer projects the image of stability and control that he has worked decades to cultivate. From his point of view, the daughter's pregnancy is a breach of unspoken rules that wealthy, high-profile families live by to avoid any hint of impropriety. These rules are cold and unyielding: never let a personal matter become public scandal, never admit to vulnerability, never be associated with situations that could be labeled weak or shameful by the unforgiving lenses of gossip columns and online tabloids. His daughter, once his pride, is now framed in his mind as a liability. She is not just a young woman facing the challenges of disability and impending motherhood, she is, in his distorted view, a public relations nightmare. The cruelty here is compounded by the fact that she has already endured physical trauma. Paralyzed, she is dependent on others for certain daily needs. She has faced the invisible walls society often builds around people with disabilities, walls made of lowered expectations, awkward stares, and exclusion from opportunities. Yet, instead of receiving more care and understanding from her family, she becomes the target of blame. The pregnancy is framed as a personal failing rather than a life event that could have been met with support. The father refuses to consider the circumstances of the relationship, her feelings for the child's father, or the possibility that this pregnancy might bring her joy and a renewed sense of purpose. Instead, he filters it all through the lens of, what will this do to my name? Social stigma plays a significant role in magnifying his reaction. In many elite social circles, disability is something to be quietly hidden or downplayed, not embraced openly. It disrupts the polished narrative of perfection that such families try to project. Add to this the fact that she is unmarried and pregnant, and the combination becomes, in his mind, a catastrophic scandal. There is an unspoken but powerful prejudice at work, the assumption that someone with a disability should not or cannot be a parent, that their body or life is somehow unsuited for the role. This belief, toxic and unfounded, influences how he justifies his decision to disown her. He convinces himself that he is protecting the family from embarrassment, perhaps even telling himself that this will teach her responsibility. In truth, it is an act of abandonment rooted in fear of judgment, fear of losing status, and fear of vulnerability. The betrayal is not just a matter of cutting her off financially or forcing her out of the family home, it's a total severing of emotional connection. For the daughter, the pain is doubled because she must process not only the practical loss of support but also the personal devastation of being rejected by her own parent at one of the most vulnerable times in her life. Her pregnancy should be a moment where she feels nurtured, where she can prepare for motherhood with guidance and security, but instead, she is left to face it entirely alone. The paralysis adds another layer of difficulty, physical challenges that make daily life more complex, let alone navigating the demands of pregnancy without assistance. The emotional impact of the rejection digs deep, reinforcing a lifetime of societal messages that say she is somehow less than, that her value is conditional on fitting an image she never asked to embody. In this situation, stigma is not a vague cultural backdrop, it is a set of active forces shaping decisions, attitudes, and consequences. People around the CEO may not openly say, "You must disown her," but they contribute to the climate that makes such an act seem reasonable. Other wealthy parents whisper about how unfortunate it is. Business associates might joke behind closed doors about damage control. Even family friends, while perhaps feeling some sympathy, might distance themselves to avoid being drawn into controversy. The daughter becomes isolated not because she has done something wrong, but because the social system around her treats her existence as a disruption to its norms. There is also the unspoken belief within such social strata that money and status can replace emotional bonds. The father might have imagined that if she needed anything, she could figure it out through some form of charity or distant support, without tarnishing his name. But when he withdraws even that minimal safety net, the betrayal becomes absolute. It is not a private conflict, it is an exile. The message is clear: she is no longer part of the family's story. In this kind of betrayal, what makes it especially cutting is the reversal of roles. Parents are supposed to be protectors, shields against the harshness of the world. When that role flips, when the parent becomes the one wielding the cruelty, it undermines the very foundation of trust. For the daughter, this is not just about losing material comfort, it is about having the person who should love her unconditionally decide that her dignity and her right to belong are expendable for the sake of reputation. The shock of that realization is profound. It is not the kind of pain that fades quickly because it is not a single event, it is a rupture in identity. Being a daughter no longer means what it used to mean. What makes this scenario even more tragic is that it is preventable. Nothing in her situation is inherently shameful. Pregnancy outside of marriage is common, disability is a part of human diversity, and family challenges are not moral failings. But when these elements collide with a mindset that values image over humanity, the result is rejection. The social stigma here is not an abstract prejudice, it's a weapon, sharpened by the father's fear of losing control over how his family is perceived. And when wielded by someone in a position of both authority and intimacy, it becomes devastatingly effective. It's also worth noting how the daughter's disability intensifies the injustice of the betrayal. Being paralyzed means that many environments are already designed to exclude her, from physical spaces that lack accessibility to social spaces that subtly or overtly question her abilities. The father's rejection doesn't just deprive her of a home, it cuts her off from the few systems that might have offered her some measure of stability. In this way, the betrayal becomes not just a moral failure but a practical act of harm, leaving her vulnerable in ways that could have severe consequences for both her and her unborn child. There is an almost performative aspect to the father's decision, even if it is not made in a public setting. Disowning her becomes a way of proving to himself, and by extension, to his peers, that he is still in control of his narrative. In his mind, he is taking decisive action to protect the family's image, much like a CEO might cut a failing division from a company to preserve the overall brand. The language of business and reputation bleeds into the language of family, erasing the human connection that should override such calculations. The tragedy here is not just in the act of disownment but in the mindset that makes it seem logical. And yet, beneath the cold reasoning, there may be flickers of suppressed conflict. It is possible the father feels shame for his shame, a buried recognition that what he is doing is wrong. But the habits of a lifetime, habits of suppressing vulnerability, of prioritizing status, of treating family as an extension of brand, overpower those feelings. If he allows compassion to win, he risks exposing himself to the same vulnerability he despises. So he buries it, convinces himself this is necessary, and carries on. For the daughter, understanding this psychology might someday explain his actions, but it will not excuse them. The wound of being cast aside for the sake of appearances is deep, and it reinforces the larger societal narrative that people with disabilities must earn their right to belong by conforming to narrow, unforgiving standards. In the end, the betrayal is not just personal, it is emblematic of a system where image, power, and the fear of judgment matter more than love, loyalty, and the recognition of shared humanity. A single father who works as a janitor. His life is, in many ways, the opposite of the CEO's: no sprawling mansion, no luxury cars, no business empires to protect. He lives modestly, raising his young daughter alone after the loss of his wife. His world is made up of everyday struggles, balancing work schedules, making sure there's enough food on the table, finding time to help with homework, and ensuring his child feels loved despite the absence of her mother. This is not a man who measures worth by status. His sense of value comes from responsibility, honesty, and the quiet satisfaction of doing what is right. When he first encounters the paralyzed pregnant woman, he doesn't see a scandal or a problem to avoid, he sees a person in need. She is in a vulnerable state, physically and emotionally drained from being abandoned by the very people who should have stood by her. The encounter might happen in a quiet corner of a public building, perhaps late in the evening when most people have gone home, or outside on a cold night when she has nowhere to go. To anyone else, she might look like someone whose life has already been decided for her, an inevitable downward spiral of hardship. But to him, she's simply another human being, deserving of dignity. His decision to help is not calculated. There's no weighing of pros and cons in terms of personal benefit. He acts out of instinct, guided by empathy that has been shaped by his own hardships. Losing his wife has left him with a deep awareness of how fragile life can be and how quickly circumstances can strip a person of stability. Perhaps in the early days after her passing, he too felt abandoned, unsure how he would manage as a single parent. He knows what it is to feel unmoored, to wake up and wonder how the day will be survived. This shared understanding of vulnerability, though born from different experiences, creates an unspoken connection between him and the CEO's daughter. He offers her shelter, not in a grand home but in a small, humble apartment that carries the warmth of a space lived in with love. It may not have luxury, but it has the essentials: a clean bed, a kitchen where simple meals are cooked, and a space where she is not looked at as an embarrassment. His daughter, curious but gentle, quickly accepts the newcomer. Children have a way of cutting through adult prejudices. They do not look at her wheelchair as a limitation but as a part of who she is, no more unusual than a pair of glasses or a different hair color. The janitor's child might even be fascinated by her, eager to help, to ask questions, to include her in games in whatever way possible. As days pass, the woman begins to notice the difference in how she is treated. The janitor does not make her feel like a burden, even though he must adapt parts of his routine to assist her. He helps her navigate the kitchen, arranges furniture so her wheelchair can move freely, and takes on extra tasks without complaint. There's a matter-of-factness in his care. He doesn't make a spectacle of his kindness or use it as leverage to gain gratitude. To him, helping is simply what people are supposed to do for each other when they can. In this way, he restores a sense of normalcy for her, something she hasn't felt since her father cast her out. The kindness also works on a deeper level. She has been living under the shadow of judgment for so long that she has internalized some of it, questioning her worth as a person and as a soon-to-be mother. The janitor, through his steady presence, begins to counter that narrative. He talks to her as if her life is not over but still full of possibility. He asks her opinion on small matters, values her input, and treats her as a capable adult rather than someone to be pitied. These small affirmations accumulate, quietly rebuilding the self-esteem that her father's rejection had shattered. There is a kind of irony in the situation. The CEO, with all his wealth and influence, refused to help his own daughter, seeing only the problems her situation might cause. The janitor, with far fewer resources, steps in without hesitation, giving what little he has and asking for nothing in return. It challenges the idea that generosity is tied to abundance. In reality, kindness often flows most freely from those who understand struggle firsthand. He may not be able to buy her expensive medical equipment or provide top-tier healthcare, but he gives her something just as valuable: a safe place where she is accepted without condition. Over time, their daily lives begin to intertwine. He learns how to assist her in ways that respect her independence, offering help without undermining her autonomy. She, in turn, finds ways to contribute, perhaps helping with his daughter's homework, reading bedtime stories, or sharing recipes she remembers from her childhood. In these moments, she stops feeling like a guest and begins to feel like part of the household. The janitor's daughter starts calling her by affectionate nicknames, and the sound of laughter begins to return to her days. This gradual weaving of lives is where the concept of a found family takes root. Found family is not bound by blood but by choice and mutual care. It is forged in moments of shared meals, whispered conversations late at night, and the simple acts of looking out for each other. She begins to see that family is not defined solely by the one she was born into but can be created anew from the bonds she builds. The janitor's kindness becomes the foundation of this new structure, one that stands in stark contrast to the cold walls of her father's world. The transformation is not without its challenges. Life in a small apartment on a janitor's salary is not easy. There are bills that arrive with relentless regularity, grocery lists that stretch thin at the end of the month, and days when exhaustion threatens to pull them all under. Yet, the difference lies in the fact that they face these challenges together. The janitor does not see her as an added burden but as someone worth the extra effort, someone whose presence enriches the life he shares with his daughter. Her pregnancy progresses, and with it comes the inevitable worries about the birth and how she will manage as a mother. But she is no longer facing those fears alone. The janitor is there at medical appointments, helping her navigate the hospital hallways. His daughter makes small gifts for the baby: a drawing to hang near the crib, a handmade blanket with uneven stitching. These acts, small in material value but immense in emotional weight, remind her that she and her child are wanted. In the quiet moments, she sometimes reflects on how different her life could have been if her father had made a different choice. The thought brings a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the loss of the relationship she once hoped to have with her family, but gratitude for the unexpected path that led her to people who care for her without reservation. The janitor's kindness has not just saved her from a desperate situation, it has redefined her understanding of what family means. It is easy to imagine that, in another life, their paths would never have crossed. The social and economic divide between the CEO's daughter and a janitor is vast, and in most circumstances, they might have lived entirely separate lives. But life's unpredictability, with all its hardships and twists, brought them together. That intersection, born from tragedy and rejection, becomes the birthplace of something resilient and hopeful. What stands out most is that his kindness is not a grand gesture performed once for dramatic effect. It is steady, consistent, woven into the fabric of everyday life. It is in the way he makes sure the fridge has food she likes, the way he adjusts his work schedule to accompany her to appointments, the way he includes her in decisions about their small household. It is not charity, it is respect. And through this respect, he gives her the tools to see herself not as a discarded burden but as someone with the strength and right to live fully. In the end, the janitor's role in her life is not about rescuing her in a dramatic, one-time event. It is about offering her the space to heal, to prepare for motherhood, and to rebuild her sense of self without the oppressive weight of judgment. His kindness becomes a quiet rebellion against the values of her father's world, proving that love and loyalty are not earned through wealth or status, but given freely to those who choose to stand by each other when it matters most.